Services Minister Anne Ruston joins me. Minister, thanks for your time. How big is that soft or undecided vote at the moment?
Well, it appears that there is quite a large undecided vote, which means that the choice out for us is to make sure that we go out there and we tell the Australian public about the strong plan we have for a strong economy and a strong future, because there are still a number of people who are undecided, and obviously they still need the information and the message that we've got to tell them about what our plans are to make sure that Australia continues to be the amazing economy and the amazing country that we all live in today.
The Prime Minister told you and your colleagues to stick to the message. Is that the message? Is it all about the economy?
Well, Kieran, I think if you have a look at what has stood us so well over the last few years as we've come through a once-in-a-lifetime pandemic, an economic shock that we've never seen since probably the Great Depression, 30 times worse than the global financial crisis. It has been that strong economy that has enabled us to be able to provide the supports to Australians that they've needed to get through the pandemic. And just recently, the cost of living measures that we were able to have in the budget to support Australians as we see cost of living pressures impacting on our country as we come out of the pandemic, I think are testament to why a strong economy is so important, because it affords us to be able to pay for those essential services that Australians rely on. Things like the NDIS, things like healthcare, things like childcare and education. All of these things are afforded because we have a strong economy.
Now, when he says stick to the message, is that also about avoiding distractions like the Catherine Deves issues, which can cause internal division? Well,
I think the Australian public want to know what our plan is for them into the future. And our budget showed a very clearly defined, fully costed, in many instances fully consulted plan that Australians can be absolutely confident that we will deliver on. We've delivered on it for the time that we've been in government, we delivered on it during the pandemic, and we will deliver on it again. And I think that the thing that the Australian public want to hear from us, they want to hear about that we're listening to them, we're responding to their needs, and we're putting in place the things that they need for their families, for their business.
You're sticking to the message.
And that's exactly what we're doing.
You're certainly sticking to the message this morning, but it's to avoid the disunity, isn't it? You can't have any shows of disunity less than a fortnight to go.
Well, the reality is that the Australian public want to know what their government is doing for them. And I think we've proven through a strong record that we are delivering for the Australian public. They don't want us to be distracted by other things. They want us to be focused entirely on what they need and making sure that we give them the confidence that we've got a strong economy so they can continue to rely on all those essential services, having a strong economy so that we can continue to defend our country. I mean, national security, our defence spending all comes on the back of a strong economy. They're the things that the Australian public want to hear about. They want to hear about a government that's focused on them.
Why do you think Andrew Hurst told your colleagues not to encourage people to pre-poll? Is that, as it seems, as obvious as it seems, just because you're behind, you need more time to make up the ground?
Well, obviously, any campaign is run over the period of time of the campaign, and there'll be messages from all sides of politics going forward right up until election day. And so we obviously want the Australian public to hear all of our messages and to make sure that those people that haven't engaged as yet, and we know that, as we talked about earlier, there are a lot of people that haven't engaged, we want them to be able to hear our messages as well. Pre-poll has a very specific purpose. It's there to make sure that those people who aren't able to poll on polling day have got the opportunity to poll in a convenient way. And so that's what it's there for. But we want Australians to hear all the messages that we have to make sure that they understand absolutely clearly and with full detail the plans that we have for Australia going forward.
On the economic performance you've touched on, and I know the government's made a lot about the unemployment rate being a strength, whereas inflation is an international flow-on effect. But if let's look at the numbers, unemployment is also an international trend. You look at the United States at 3.6% unemployment, UK at 3.8%. It seems like, while you're claiming credit for that and saying inflation's an international trend, it's actually both, you would say, are international factors right now off the back of the pandemic.
Well, obviously you only have to have a look at the trend lines that we've seen for unemployment since we've been in government. Actually, a really interesting comparison that's worth looking at. When John Howard came into government, he inherited an 8.5% unemployment rate, and he managed by 2007 to get that down to 4.2%. So Mr Rudd inherited 4.2% and got it back up to 5.7%. Over the time that we've been in government, we've dropped it from 5.7% down to less than 4%. This has been a trend that has been occurring through the entire time that we've been in government.
It's happening around the world, though, isn't it? It's not just our country. It's happening around the world.
Well, I think if you have a look at the trend that has been occurring well before the pandemic, we were certainly on a trajectory to reduce unemployment. And it was the measures that we put in place, like making sure that we were creating jobs, the 1.3 million jobs that we created prior to this budget, the 1.3 million jobs that we have on our books to make sure that we create going forward, the investments that we've made in our skills and training, the investment that we've made into apprentices. It is all of these kind of factors combined that mean that we have the jobs for Australians and the training to make sure that they've got the skills to go into it. So there are things that governments can do in relation to unemployment. There are also things that we've been doing to alleviate the cost of living pressures that you talk about in relation to the inflation rate, many of which were in the budget and some of which we have announced since then. Things like the halving of excise on fuel, things like making sure that older Australians can get more access to concessional medicines, dropping the maximum amount that people pay for medicines. There are many things that we've put in place to relieve cost of living pressures. At the same time, there are many things that we've put in place to make sure that Australians have jobs.
So there have been so many election commitments made on a daily basis almost in marginal seats, millions going out the door every day. Is it time to ease up on this spending? Is it appropriate right now, given the inflationary environment we're in? The RBA is trying to cool things down. The political parties are pushing money out the door.
Well, certainly the measures that we're putting in place are a balance between understanding the inflationary pressures, but at the same time understanding that Australians are facing cost of living pressures and giving them a level of relief. So I think that is what a government needs to do. It needs to balance that within the budget mechanisms. I mean, we have committed going forward to lower taxes across the board. We have committed to putting a speed limit on spending at 23.9% of GDP. We have guaranteed that we will not exceed that. The other side have not. We saw also yesterday a contradiction between Mr Albanese and Mr Chalmers as to whether their deficits were going to be bigger or not. We are absolutely being transparent with the Australian public on our spending, how we're going to fund that spending, where we're going to spend it, and we have also put in place those restraints that Australians can be confident that we have the economy well and truly under control. I mean, the fact that we were able to book the largest budget improvement on the bottom line back in the budget in over 70 years demonstrates that we understand the economy, we understand how it works, and we've got a plan to make sure we grow the economy, but at the same time recognising that people sometimes will need some support as we get there.
Looks like you might not have convinced one person who I thought might have voted for you. That's Malcolm Turnbull. He appears to be encouraging a vote for the Teal independents. He says the Liberal or moderate voices have been marginalised in the Liberal Party, their influence much diminished and diminishing, especially on the toxically controversial issue of climate change. You're a moderate. What do you say to him?
Well, I mean, obviously I don't agree. I think that our party has shown once again the capacity to be a really broad church and to make sure that we are representing all Australians in the policies that we put forward. I would say that we have made a very strong commitment to net zero by 2050, but we're not going to do it by taxing Australians. We're not going to do it by pushing up household power bills. We're not going to do it by making business wear the burden. We're going to do it by applying technology, and that's why we have such a strong investment in renewable energy technologies, because we do understand an obligation going forward to have a carbon, a clean energy future. But we're going to do it in a sensible and responsible way. We're going to do it by technology and not by taxes, because we don't want to damage Australian families, Australian business and the Australian community on the way
How
forward.
damaging to have your most recent former Prime Minister out there not even saying whether he'd vote Liberal?
Well, I mean, obviously that every Australian has the right to the secrecy of their ballot, and I absolutely respect that 100%. Every Australian.
But he's your most recent former PM. I don't think we'd have any problem getting John Howard to say he'd vote Liberal. John Howard, I think I could say, we could call him this morning, he'd confirm it. We asked Mr Turnbull face to face, he wouldn't say he's going to vote Liberal. It's extraordinary.
Well, that's entirely his right to keep his ballot secret.
Not a bad look?
Well, obviously, I'd be encouraging all Australians to consider the choice that they have before them at the moment, a choice of a strong government with a strong plan for a strong future for this country. And I think, that we have got a very convincing argument, and I would say to every single Australian that the choice that is before you is an opportunity between re-electing a strong government or electing a weak leader. They are the two choices that are before us. And so I would say to every Australian, really have a look at the policies that the coalition government has on the table, because I believe they are strong policies to make Australia a strong country, and a strong country means a strong future for every Australian.
Big debate tonight and on Wednesday. A key couple of set-piece events before the final fortnight really gets up some momentum. But you say Mr Albanese is a weak leader. Is it weak to not know 5 or 6 dot points? Is that what you're alluding to there?
Well, I mean, you only have to have a look at the track record that we've seen so far. I mean, the start of the campaign, 2 really important economic indicators that underpin our economy, he didn't know. He then didn't really understand the assumptions that sit under our 3-pillared border protection policy that have stopped the boats coming to Australia. We then saw that he didn't understand the basis of one of his policies. I mean, he hasn't got very many policies. It shouldn't be too hard to be able to remember the details of the few that he has put out there. And then yesterday,
but do you think that suggests he's weak?
Well, certainly everything that we've seen so far is... Well, everything that we've seen so far, every time you scratch the surface of any policy that's been put forward by the Labor Party, you will find it wanting. Every time Mr Albanese is asked questions about the details of just about anything that he or his team have put out, he doesn't seem to understand the underlying assumptions. I mean, I think Australia deserves better.
And you're still behind in the polls.
Minister well, that is the next 2 weeks. We will continue to be working to inform the Australian public of our strong plan for a strong economy, to show them that the choice that they have is between a really strong leader who understands the underlying assumptions that are the policies that we're taking to the Australian public, and a leader who really doesn't understand them. I think the choice is pretty clear if you see the strength of Mr Morrison and you see the flip-flopping, wobbling around of Mr Albanese. I think Australians, as they start engaging with this election going forward, will realise the choice is pretty simple. A strong government will deliver the best things for Australia, which means it will deliver the best things for them.
Anne Ruston, thanks. I said earlier you're in Brisbane. Our viewers can see there was a late campaign change of schedule. You're in Melbourne, the beautiful city of Melbourne. Enjoy the day. Happy Mother's Day to you and appreciate your time. Thank you, and happy Mother's Day to all your listeners as well.